piece of feedback I got when I, sat down very earnestly with the GC and said, I think I really want to take on the operating budget. And without a pause, she said, well, but you're horrible with numbers. I can't give you the budget. And, my, very paper thin ego at that time was just, mortified. But I, to this day, would not be where I was without that feedback.
The Abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at spotdraft.com.
How does the nature of an organization shape the design of a legal operations program? How can legal leaders of all types embrace the innovations that legal ops professionals are bringing to legal departments? And where is legal operations as a profession headed? Today, we are lucky to be joined by my friend Susan Packal, head of global legal operations at Atlassian. We're live here in Las Vegas at CLOC. Susan has had an illustrious career leading legal ops functions at companies including Hilton, Uber, eBay, Twilio, Snick, and now Atlassian. Quite a few household names in there. She also had her own legal operations consulting firm for a little while, and that was when we first met. So Susan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks. Hi, Tyler. How are you doing?
Good. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Same.
Live from CLOC.
Live from CLOC. It's a thing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You've actually been to quite a few CLOCs. Tell us about how CLOC has changed over the years, grown. How much bigger is it than when you first started attending?
Well, I remember the days back when the CLOC org had like monthly or quarterly calls with like the CLOC org, and it was really mainly West Coast. So I was one of those East Coast people trying to get in on the call, just trying to get in with other people doing the crazy jobs that we were doing. They let me in eventually onto some of the calls, which is good. But no, back in the day, we didn't have over 3,000 people here in attendance. We didn't have as many GCs attending at that time. It was really just a bunch of operators getting together. So it was a whole new day at CLOC now.
When CLOC was started, do you feel like that was an important inflection point in defining legal operations as a term or a profession? Or like, how was legal ops perceived at that time?
Yeah, 100%. I think at the time, I hope I'm getting my history right here, but I do remember the two big places where we were starting to bring some structure to the field was ACC and CLOC. And really those two groups working, sort of independently, but a lot of people floating back and forth were pulling the industry together, starting to come to bring common terms around what we did, what the job was, and then also helping each other with competencies that we needed to develop. So without those two organizations, the field would not be where it is today.
Let's talk about what it's like to start from scratch. You were at Hilton.
Yes.
You were the first one to do legal ops there.
Yes.
As I said, that's a huge organization. I don't think that's surprising to anybody listening in. How did you get going? How did you begin to build a legal ops program at Hilton?
Well, certainly a theme throughout my career has been GCs that were really forward-thinking, that knew, they might not have known everything that legal ops would bring, but they knew enough to know that that needed to be one of their hires. And so I was fortunate at Hilton that when I joined Hilton, it had been bought by private equity. The Hilton family was no longer involved. They'd moved their headquarters to out of Beverly Hills to McLean, Virginia. All of the big hotel headquarters were in that space. So Hilton had a huge presence. And the GC that had come there was fairly new. And she had a legal operations senior person in her last role. And so she knew that's what she wanted at Hilton. So again, somebody who already had that vision somewhat laid out of what she wanted. But since my career started in HR, that's actually how I started working with her, was as an HR VP. And during that time, she was recruiting for a role for a legal ops person. So I was helping them recruit for their first legal ops hire. And we could not find anyone. I mean, I don't know if it was me. I didn't understand what she wanted. They didn't quite, we were just missing the mark. We talked to attorneys. We talked to senior paralegals. We were all over the place. And finally, I just sat down one day and just said, I got to be honest. I'm not sure I know what we're looking for. Like, we're missing the mark. I know this is taking longer than you'd expected. And she said, well, I don't know why you're not interested in this role. Like, let's just talk about that for a minute. So really, it was sort of turning the tables on me. But again, it was from pulling from 10 plus years at law firms, to doing operations, to having some HR in the space. I think she just had enough experience under her belt to know, like, that's a good combination. Let's start there. You should do this role. And so that was my entrance, officially moving from HR into an actual titled legal ops role. And it wasn't even a player coach role. It was a player role. So building a function from the ground up, I did everything. And it was, just starting to build those relationships with finance and with technology. And that's where it all started.
That's great. Is that something that you've done then later on, which is find someone maybe in an adjacent function or someone who's playing another role on a legal team and bring them into legal ops?
Yes. In fact, I'm doing that more now than I ever have before. I'm building a really different team at Atlassian than I ever have in my career. And it is a joy. It's new, taking risks, but I'm looking for just those certain competencies out there to fill my roles. And their people are coming from, outside counsel management focus or program management, biz ops. They're coming with different strategy and transformation backgrounds, agile, and pulling all of those skill sets under operations. And it has just been a force multiplier.
When you were at Hilton, so you're getting started, right? You're learning the role as you're embarking on it.
Learning and stumbling and learning and stumbling.
Building the plane while you're flying it, or whatever the right analogy is. Over the course of the years that you were there, how did you think about where you wanted to get to? Like, what were the big accomplishments, and also maybe what, in the environment of Hilton, private equity owned, what were the sort of roadblocks that you anticipated you were going to need to navigate around on your way? What was the North Star?
Yeah, so I think back then, I probably didn't have enough career under my belt to know what my North Star was for building operations. I did not have a roadmap at that time. Being owned by private equity, expense management and cost efficiency was number one, which I know we just had, panels at CLOC today of how that shouldn't be, our number one focus, but in a role like that where you're building from the ground up, it had to be. That was absolutely. And that is where I tell this story a lot, where I got the best career feedback of my life. So to your point, I knew I wanted to grow legal operations at the time, wanted my career to advance. So I wanted as much responsibility and different projects that I could get. And so one of those was I wanted to advance more into a chief of staff role. And so having full oversight over the operating budget for Hilton's legal department was where I wanted to go, but it had been historically run by their deputy general counsel. And the piece of feedback I got when I, sat down very earnestly with the GC and said, I think I really want to take on the operating budget. And without a pause, she said, well, but you're horrible with numbers. I can't give you the budget. And, my very paper thin ego at that time was just, mortified. But I, to this day, would not be where I was without that feedback, because I immediately picked up my ego, my bruised ego, left the room, and just put an action plan together and said, oh, no, that cannot be.
Yeah.
That cannot be where my reputation stands. So I threw myself on the mercy of FP&A, but that's really where I learned like how to read a P&L and diving into how the company makes money and, you know, how can you focus on reducing outside counsel spend, like literally move the numbers.
Yeah.
How can you give a GC at that level of a company dashboards? So she was very patient with me, but I have to say once I took I think it took about a quarter to get that skill set under my belt. We beat budget every quarter after that for the time that I was there. And I did have oversight over the budget by the time I left. But that skill set, literally taken it with me now to every single role. Yeah.
I want to get to Twilio in a minute, but let's talk about the chief of staff idea for a second. I actually think that's for folks in legal ops, but also more broadly, just a very interesting role in legal departments. You've done that a few times. Can you tell us about what chief of staff means to you, and also maybe how the GC that you work with, the GC that you serve, shapes what the chief of staff role ends up becoming? You've been chief of staff, is it 3 times or 2 times? 3 times,
right.
Yeah.
That's right, and not currently in the role that I'm in now. But yeah, I think what's interesting is I think just again talked about this at CLOC today, even just with legal ops. Chief of staff looks different at a lot of different organizations. Yeah. And particularly when I look across the enterprise at a company like Atlassian, chiefs of staff come up through R&D, they come up through engineering. I mean, they come from, and they're solid program managers. Like these people can run a program, you know, they're agile, you know, they're Lean Six Sigma. I mean, these are experts. But it can look different at different organizations. And I think some of the GCs I have worked for are leveraging my experience having run the operations function like a business for them. And now they want to turn that skill set into like, okay, I need you to run all my affairs to that same degree. So that's you know, running their leadership team, you know, the agendas for that. How do you raise a legal leadership team's competency from here to here? Like they're leveraging 20 some years experience in that role. It's not a program management role that I've experienced.
Right. When you've done that successfully, do you feel like you've had to bring in program managers into your ops org to help you, right? In other words, if you're serving almost as the COO, chief of staff for the GC, do you almost need like your own program manager, your own little COO in your department too?
Yeah, it's funny. I think at Twilio was a good example. So when I joined that legal team, we were 26 people in legal, and we were 175 when I left. And so there was an inflection point in there where the GC and I had a real conversation about, you know, can you continue to do ops and chief of staff? Because this is, you know, I need more of you than that. So that, to your point, then getting people that had legal operations experience who could run the day-to-day and me step back and, you know, run strategy for it. But ops day-to-day was absolutely necessary. I couldn't have done the chief of staff role well if I hadn't have made that decision. So you do reach a point where it's very, very difficult to do both. But to have a GC say, you know, tell me how I can be better, and whether it's personal branding and making sure they're attending the right conferences and you know, taking everything we know about operational excellence and applying it towards the office of the GC, that can be really powerful for a GC who wants that. And not every GC wants that.
It elevates them.
It can, absolutely it can.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about Twilio. What did you focus on when you showed up?
Tyler, building it, walked in the door. No, but it was like a case of where, like most companies, just really operational minded, solid, smart folks had been, you know, doing it as a side job, you know, until they decided to make the investment. So I was fortunate enough when I walked in the door, there was an e-billing system in place. So not a whole lot else, but, you know, there was that in place. And so just had something to just stick your toe in and build from there. But no, those were the days pre-pandemic where it was, you know, it was all about scaling. And so when you have a company that was doubling in size every year and just could not keep up with the growth, the legal team was just, that's what we were doing. So everything I touched, it was, okay, is this going to get us to, you know, 3 more years? Is this going to get us to, like, I just didn't have time to invest in something that I was going to have to rip out or replace a year later. And so then as I built the team under me, a lot of program management, a lot of just putting things in place. But again, it was a building environment.
Yeah.
So it was very much a player coach role. We all had our hands on something at the beginning. But then to see that growth and see how the team had evolved by the time I left, that just gave me a lot of joy looking back.
Yeah. What would you say some of your biggest successes were at Twilio? Things that you would point out on your resume if you were interviewing at a place like Atlassian?
Well, I'll give you some non-standard typical answers of the technology, but I think putting the right leadership team in place, that was a challenge. And I think for a company that's growing where maybe at the time a lot of those lawyers had worked together for quite some time, and now you may be going external to put people on your leadership team. You're not necessarily bringing people up through the ranks. That has its own challenges.
Sure.
But I think walking away and knowing that, a lot of those leaders are still there, they were the right people to come in and bring Twilio to the next level. And so we don't always hire right the first time, but when you get it right, it can be just a game changer. So I'm just really, really proud of having been part of that evolution. And then I would say too, the only time in my career actually I had the opportunity to transition one GC out and a new GC in. So I was in charge of running that transition. First time I'd done it, but I had been doing, the chief of staff for 4 years. So I knew it better than anyone else. But again, I had to then switch my lens and say, okay, I'm a new GC coming in. What do I need to know in my first 30, 60 days so that I can get in and start doing this job?
Sure.
They can handle the C-suite, but what do they need from legal? And so that was a challenge, but I'm really, really proud of that. And I hope I get a chance to do that again. None of my current GCs take that as any kind of, wish against them. But I hope at some point I'll just have a chance to at least maybe even be on a transition team to do that, because it takes a lot of work, but I'm really, really proud of that.
I just thought of it. I used to work in compliance, and I thought about compliance work and privacy work and policy work as being very important for helping set a culture for a legal org, but also for sort of the wider organization. How much have you felt like in your different roles leading either legal ops or as a chief of staff, part of what you're doing? I'm asking this because you were at this period of hyper growth at Twilio, right? How much did you think about, hey, one of the really important things that we're doing here as legal ops is we're helping build a legal team with a particular culture, or we're helping Twilio scale with a particular culture in mind? Was that something that you thought about?
I would say, I would answer it maybe not how you would expect. I think in that environment at that time, we were less concerned about joining hands with other teams that were also scaling and approaching things the same way and leveraging each other's successes. I do feel like at the time, while those were cross-functional partners, legal was we were just plowing forth and doing and executing and just keeping up with the rest of the company. I think now I have the luxury of being able to leverage all of the other work that's happening at Atlassian, whether it's strategy and biz ops or finance and transformation, these big teams where they're brilliant people working in that spaces. Why would I go at these things alone? But to join hands with them and say, okay, let's talk about AI utilization for this G&A function. What are we doing? What are we thinking? What are we going to prioritize? I feel like that's just working smartly. Yeah. So I think, again, two different experiences, different time, different company culture, different macroeconomic environment.
Yes.
But I feel like now, just to answer your question more directly, I feel like now I'm much more looking across the company and saying, okay, where are we seeing wins? You're facing the same issues I am in running your function like a business.
Yes.
How can we leverage each other's work and not going it alone? And I think that's incredibly rewarding as well. You can move much faster that way.
At Atlassian's a software company, as I think most people probably know, and it builds tech that is directly relevant to legal ops. I'm sure that there are legal ops leaders out there who've built a large part of their workflows or tech stack or ticketing systems, et cetera.
People love Jira.
Built it on Jira, right?
They love Jira.
Our product team, by the way, is a big fan of Jira. With that in mind, have you really had to evolve the way that you're approaching the legal ops role? And I'm also curious about hiring as well, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
I was just talking about this with someone this morning. You're always learning. And so this was no different. And coming into this role, I am building a team like I've never built before. So I am just taking risks, stepping outside of my comfort zone and doing it because it's what we need at the company. So what does that translate into? It is I've hired the most technically proficient team I've ever had. I really could not did not have the luxury to be able to take time to train people on our products. So when you put out there that you have to know Jira to a certain degree on a job description for ops,
Right.
a certain percentage of those applicants fall away, unfortunately. So,
Yeah.
but I knew it was the smartest thing to do, not to train people up, but bring experts in. And it has been a game changer. I mean, the lawyers notice our ops team knows way more about our technology than we do. And that's obviously what we want in order to add more value. So yes, building it differently now than I ever have before.
We've talked about sort of 3 different companies, 3 different approaches. Would you be willing to compare and contrast those sort of experiences? Maybe like summarize for the listeners, like something that worked really well at Hilton worked well because Hilton was an environment like this. Something that really worked well at Twilio was an environment like this. And then at least in still somewhat early days at Atlassian. But and it could even just be the sort of way that you approach other stakeholders in the business and the way that you go about getting buy-in for your work.
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I think there's a lot of different ways I can answer it. But I think what's speaking to me at the moment on how to answer that is knowledge of the business is king, or queen. And I feel that had I been able to master more, like a company like Hilton, it's 95 years old when I walked in the door. We had 12 different brands at the time, different hotel brands. And, we had hundreds of attorneys. And so to have the luxury of time onboarding there to really dig into how the company, the intricacies of how they made money, I just did not have the luxury to do that at that time. And I think each subsequent role since then, it has been more and more and more of a focus. And then Atlassian was one of the first companies where they were like, please don't do any work for the next 60 days. Please learn the business. Please, leaders coming in, you've got to take that time to really understand it. And so I think, so the answer to your question is they were different in that respect. Each company was different. I feel like Uber at the time, was the height of just Uberness and what was going on in the world at the time, right? And they were all, scaling and every month, every week, there was something new happening there. Didn't have the luxury to be able to do that. So again, coming into an environment where it's like, we're already behind. We have 300 lawyers. We have the largest outside counsel budget I've ever seen in my life. There just wasn't the time to be strategic in some of those ways. And I feel like now, call it macroeconomic, call it maturity, whatever you want. Now taking that time and the value that's placed in that is coming in as a new leader is exactly where I want to be. If I could take myself now and bring myself back to Hilton in those days, game changer, game changer.
They would have been even luckier to have you because they would have been, fully resourcing you to your full potential.
That's right. You could do over, but you don't get the second chance. But you can learn, pay it forward.
With that in mind, any mistakes you think that you've made along the way, or the org has made along the way, that you think if you put it out there, others would be able to avoid making it, right? Or things that you might have done differently with hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation wake up moment about the finance side of operations, probably came a little late for me, and I wish someone had cared enough or gotten pissed off enough, let's say, or what have you, to have brought that up earlier for me. So again, sometimes those rude awakening moments are your pivotal points in your career. So certainly not having the foresight to prioritize that before I did that time, I would call that a mistake. But now since I have gone through that, that's not how I want my team to grow. So now that's an area for me where I'm always, wanting to impart more knowledge there and have people learn by doing in order to sit in my seat one day. It's really important that I say that to people all the time, is if you're waiting to really understand how to read a P&L and understand the business till you're ready to become a director, you've waited too long.
Do you read to the extent that you are able to access them at public companies, like do you read the 10Ks and 10Qs and listens to the earnings calls?
I read every
and
shareholder report that comes out. I attend every earnings call.
Yeah.
And I think that's required of us to be good leaders. I think back to this, I didn't answer the rest of your question. Sure, I've made mistakes.
Yeah.
I think we made some hiring mistakes along the way. I think hiring for what I thought I needed, but then later realized what the business needed. I was more focused on where I thought ops needed the help and less about what was going to get the business of legal where it needed to go. And these are all things that you just learn through trial and error. But what is exciting then is when you get to be as old as I am doing this, you get to a point where it starts making sense. And so again, I feel like the team I'm building right now is the team that my company needs to take them to the next 5-10 years. And that's the best feeling ever.
Yeah. Maybe just one or two more substantive questions, and then I have a couple of kind of fun wrap-up ones.
Okay.
I think of you as someone, and you brought up the finance example, we've talked about chief of staff. I think of you as someone who really is able to build trust with your general counsel and understands that that's a very important part of doing the ops job well. How do you do that? Right. And maybe also keep in the back of your head as you're answering, let's say that you're not hired in as the head of legal ops to build a team. Maybe it's a smaller legal org and you're hired as a legal operations manager level, right? And so you might not be seen as, say, a peer to the associate GCs who are really working really closely with the GC on a day-to-day basis, given that context too, right?
Sure.
How do you think about building trust with GCs or CLOs?
Sure. Well, people who know me and who know my career know that that hasn't always been an easy journey. It really, I think, being younger and ambitious in your career, you want more, and sometimes you're not ready for more. And so those are lessons you learn along the way. And I think that over time, when that relationship became sacrosanct and when you fade into the background, you sort of check your ego at the door as a chief of staff, it is a thankless job, but it's so needed and so valued and appreciated. But in general, it's very, very, very behind the scenes. But people see the mark that you leave and see, the before you, how things went, and then the after you started doing that role, how things went. And it's good when people say, it's so much better. So I think, over time, I've had to acquire the body of knowledge that was more than my GC had in a certain space, right? So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to know more about 10Ks and employment law than our lawyers do.
Sure.
But I know more about operations typically than most of the GCs, not all, but most of the GCs I've worked with, and that's what they've hired you for. So I think, having and understanding how other GCs you've worked with have been successful, how they play into the executive team. Are they reporting to the CEO? That can be an important factor.
Sure.
How do you help them raise their visibility? Getting in with the other chiefs of staff for the other executives so that the GC is getting the same level of chief of staff support as everybody else on the exec team. You'd think that would be a no-brainer. Not always the case. Those are all things that just took me many years to figure that out. And then once I was able to start delivering results, that in itself starts building that trust. And I think that just took years to get there. And after some stumbling around, was able to find some pretty amazing GCs that pushed me, trusted me, challenged me to say, you're not doing your job, Susan, if you're not making me better. I need you to really tell me. Not every GC is going to want that, but the ones who did, made me a better chief of staff. So those are people I still carry with me.
Yeah.
They're very dear to me. But I think back to the other part of your question, I don't care what level you are in legal operations. I think when you come in and you get that you can talk and say as much as you want, but until you start showing some results, people are going to look at you a little skeptically. And so I think a manager of legal operations who takes that one big project they're responsible for and delivers results and can show the impact, that's your first that's your first battle. And then just keep doing that. And if you can, deliver results, but also show the impact and have people understand that, that's how you start moving your career. I think what was one of the messages this morning we heard at CLOC too, was about storytelling. And I know it's something we talk about at the leadership level a lot at Atlassian, is we need to be better storytellers. And legal ops is no different. And as we talked about this morning at the keynote, we talked a lot about how do we continue to move this career field forward. Well, we have to be better at telling stories.
Yes.
And so that's something that I personally right now am really focused on, developing that competency. I know I can be better there.
Super insightful. In summary, you have to earn it, but then it's worth it in the end.
Yeah, be ambitious, but at the end of the day, yes, you got to earn it.
Yeah. Okay, just a couple of more questions for you. I'm a big reader, and people have heard who've listened. I like to read on airplanes when I'm traveling. I don't like to respond to emails on airplanes. Any recommendations for books you would have for me or for the audience?
For this audience?
For this, well, I mean, it could be just a fun book that you've read recently too, but a business book works too.
Okay, I'll give you a business book.
Okay.
Radical Candor.
Okay.
I think it is one I probably put off reading for too long, thinking like, oh, everybody's reading it, I'm sure I'll pick it up.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah, I haven't read that one.
It's excellent. And then Smart Brevity. Actually, something I have put in with my team. We're using the methodology. It was something that our Team Anywhere group within Atlassian, they're known for making us a remote first company and having the data to back it up. They started using the Smart Brevity principles, and they can show the data on how much more effective they've been with communication. So we've put that in our own team. So we've sort of changed how we do blast communications and how I send out leadership updates and so forth. But on the fun side, anybody who knows me knows I am a huge true crime fan.
Okay.
Like, a little probably scary. I'm not homicidal, but at all. But I probably listen to true crime 3 hours a day.
Wow.
Every day.
Podcasts,
Dateline.
Yeah.
Special cases that come up in the news. You name it. If it is a true crime that has happened anywhere around the world that has made it in the news, I've probably know about it or read about it or listened to it.
Amazing.
So if you want some true crime recommendations, I'm your person.
What's the best true crime, call it like streaming TV show series that you've seen recently?
That I've seen recently.
Well,
I will say this, and you know this. This is one you know. I rewatched O.J. Simpson.
Oh, the FX one.
The one on Netflix.
The one on Netflix.
Yeah. I just rewatched it.
Okay.
And it was very interesting just going back to understanding what was happening in the U.S. at that time, and how, again, the courtroom drama is what you're really into, less focused on the horrific murder, but the courtroom and just the prosecution's tactics, and I get so into that. And understanding what's happening in the U.S. at the time, I think we forget what we were living through at the time. So it's a
cultural story as well.
It is a cultural story, and it was filmed, I believe, by the same people who do a lot of the NFL sports documentaries.
That's right.
And so it was done really, really well with the historical context. So.
All right, I might have to go back and rewatch that.
It's a good. You think you know the story, but do you really know the full context and story?
And I'll read Smart Brevity too. I read Axios every morning, but I haven't read the book.
You're already into Smart Brevity, you didn't even know it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a game changer. I would highly recommend it.
Last question for you. I like to ask this of pretty much all the guests. Okay. If you could look back on your days, getting started in legal operations, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
Wow. So much. How much time? We don't have that much time.
My guest earlier offered to write a book.
Okay, well, I have something else I'm working on that maybe you can talk to me about that in a year.
Exciting.
But no, I at the risk of sounding repetitive, I probably am biased on the finance piece because it, again, has sort of been one of the keys to how I've grown my career. But if I had done it earlier, if I had focused on it earlier, I think I would even be stronger now. And I don't know, maybe might have moved over into a finance operations role. I'm not sure. But certainly a COO role. Shout out to Akshay. That is certainly things I've considered for my future career. And so I just feel that the understanding the finance side of the business is the top.
That's fantastic. That's a wrap. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah. And to all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in to our episode live from CLOC, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd recommend that you give my interview with Jen McCarron, president of CLOC, a listen. We talk about how to grow in your legal ops role and where the legal ops profession is headed. You can also subscribe so you can get notified as soon as we post a new episode. And if you liked this one, I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so leave a rating or a comment. If you'd like to reach out to me or Susan, our LinkedIn profiles are in the description. See you all next week.